have a challenge for affordable financing.
Now, education in Africa is increasingly becoming unaffordable on the back of poorly thought out educational reforms. Now, this is despite education being an integral part of different economies and in shaping future generations. Now, KTN's Esther Diana spoke to Dr. Tony Devine, Vice President for Education at the Global Peace Foundation, and they delved into matters education for sustainable development. She brings us this exclusive interview. Take a look.
You're welcome, sir.
Oh, delighted to be with you, Diana.
Thank you, thank you. So then, can you speak to us about the place of education in sustainable development?
Yes, I think everybody knows that, for an economy to develop, you need an educated workforce, right? But today, just having an education based on the conventional educational framework, which is basically knowledge and information, is no longer enough. Mm-hmm. So, for example, right, if you look at the Fortune 500 companies around the world, which they're literally all over the world now, they're no longer hiring on intellectual capability alone. Mm-hmm. They're actually hiring on character. They're hiring on relationships. They're hiring on, energy and vitality. The only ones that care about, these certificates and degrees are the educators themselves. There's a disconnect to the real world. And besides that, besides the workforce, we need graduates actually who can become good citizens. People of good character become good citizens, right? Mm-hmm. And they can actually create and be supportive of and advance peace in their neighborhoods, their communities. They can build better families, which is the bedrock of any good society, right? And then, that actually gives us a fighting chance to usher in a peaceful civilization and in an age of abundance as well. So it's no longer an educated workforce intellectually, but it is actually an education that is anchored in lifelong character and holistic growth.
All right. So what do you have to say? I feel like, are you endorsing the idea of upskilling or rather equipping professionals with soft skills? And if that's the case, can you speak to us about soft skills in areas of political environments and financial management? What is the essence of soft skills?
Yeah, if you mean by oftentimes soft skills, often talk about things like your communication, collaboration, taking initiative, being resilient, right? The thing about these kind of competencies is that they're value neutral, actually, right? So it's no longer enough to have skills. You need something deeper, right? Which is, you need to be a person of value.
All right, so can we speak about conventional education, the education system that is known? You go to kindergarten, you go to primary school, you go to secondary school, and then college. So how is this important? In what ways is this a particular kind of education important for growth of economies?
Yes, I'm glad you brought up the conventional educational system, right? So the conventional education system that we know today has been around for 300 years. It actually started in the industrial age, right? It was producing the workers for the production lines and so on. It's actually, its focus is the acquisition of knowledge primarily, right? And it has very, very little to do with cultivating these higher order qualities that we've just been talking about. There's very little going on with relationship development, social, emotional learning, or character development, or even skills, right? And it's all about the acquisition of knowledge, and the teachers have become transmitters of knowledge, right? And that's what's assessed. That is actually what is being assessed the world over, right?
All right, so back in Kenya, and we've seen this in many different economies, education sectors in different countries are rather trying to move away from the conventional way of studies, or rather curriculum. And there's been a lot of educational reforms. The uptake is slow, and we do not understand why. So what is your take on education reforms? How informed should a government be in order to have an educational reform?
Yeah, so reforms have been around for a very, very long time, right? There's always new education policies going on. International agencies are trying to address the future of education and so on. But what is overlooked over and over and over and over again is the purpose of education, right? So, as I was saying earlier, the purpose of education has not changed for 300 years. It's lifelong learning. Mm-hmm. And, once we kind of realize that that's no longer enough, it's no longer adequate, we actually have to transition to the true purpose of education, which is essentially helping our growth as human beings to lifelong character and holistic growth. So unless that transition is made, we're only going to be getting iterative improvements, right? So very fortunately in our work, we are engaging ministries of education now, right? And we're having a lot of discussion and give and take on these important matters.
All right, so still on the reforms in Kenya, we've recently, like in the recent month or year, we've had this educational reform where there's an introduction of a new curriculum, the competency-based curriculum. Much as you point out that reforms have been there and they are integral for the growth of the education sector in different markets. But then this particular reform comes at a cost. It is too expensive. It is too expensive for many Kenyan households. So then from where you sit, how can African countries, how can Kenya make education affordable again?
Okay, so this is a great question, right? And it brings to mind, right? Where does this kind of education start? It actually does not start in educational institutions. It starts in families, right? So the most essential type of quote-unquote education is from parents and grandparents nurturing in their children good character, manners, right behavior, right? Being considerate of others, right? So we're actually doing workshops now with parents, and we're advocating that the primary partnership should be between families and schools. So once that partnership starts to get traction, right, you won't have this cost challenge anymore, right? For example, today, the Ministry of Education alone cannot do this anymore, right? We need, and we were told exactly this by the Ministry of Education of Kenya, that there's gaps, and they seek collaboration with civil society organizations, corporate and so on. They want that, right? They recognize that it's going to take, and families too, the involvement of families. So when you look at it from that point of view, right, it becomes suddenly all doable. But if one agency has to take the entire burden on, it's going to be cost prohibitive, number one, and I don't believe you can get the outcomes, number two, right? Yeah.
So then from that, building on that, can you speak to us about budgetary allocations? Because I understand in Kenya, like for this particular financial year, the oncoming one, the one that has not been approved yet, education got the single largest allocation. However, education is still one of the most challenged sector in Kenya, because teachers perennially complain because of, incentives. So then what would you encourage governments, or rather maybe Kenyan government, what incentives should they put in place? Because it is a communal thing. It starts at home, but then students are coming to meet with teachers. What incentives should they put forward for teachers to ensure communal learning, or rather holistic learning, just to encourage teachers?
Yes, so first of all, I feel that just from a budgetary point of view, that education should receive the biggest budget, right, number one. But throwing money at the issue is not going to solve the problem alone, right? So we need, that's why in the work we're doing, we're talking about transforming education, right? It's not continuing, not throwing a budget at the conventional education system and expanding that. We need to make a dynamic transition, catalytic transformation, right, to its true purpose. We need better ideas, number one, and then budgets to support those more transformative approaches that are way more effective and can be done at a fraction of the cost, actually.
All right, so that brings me to my question. What are some of the world's best practices when it comes to education, and what can other countries and some African countries learn from them? What can they borrow from them?
You know, when you look at the education sector globally, right, the global education system is stuck in the past, the world over, right? Whether it's the US, Europe, you pick any country, they're all stuck in the conventional educational model, right? It's all about the acquisition of knowledge. There's very little going on, you know, in cultivating these other dimensions. So so far, there is no country that I can point out, right, who is actually developing the whole person. However, we can point to some best practices. We can point to certain schools.
All right, so being in the middle ground, you're in between the education, governments, and other organizations. Being in the middle ground, what are some of the challenges you face as an organization?
Yeah, so probably the biggest challenge we have faced in the past is kind of like a resistance to change, because you know the conventional education system has incredible it's like the Titanic, right? So you're trying to shift the Titanic that's heading for an iceberg, right? And it's like a mile away. Do you know what I mean?
All right, so then as we conclude, from your experience, from your observation and analysis, how would you gauge, or where do you put Africa in the sense of in regards to education?
That is a great question. And I've thought about this a long, long time. And the reason we're in Africa, the reason we're in Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania and Nigeria, we have these 4 affiliates here, right? So Africa, by 2050, I think, you know, 1 in 4 human beings on planet Earth are going to be African, right? Africa has the largest chunk of the 1.2 billion students in the world. So, you know, if you think about it, right, the number 1 asset of any nation is not its raw materials or its technological know-how. It is the young people, the people, right? So the reason that I have tremendous hope here in Africa is this amazing cadre of young people that if they actually, you know, and the educators who are engaged with them, right, that are now, you know, we're having give and take on these things, if they can actually graduate and they're on a trajectory of continuous lifelong character and holistic growth, those graduates will create stable economies. It will actually usher in an age of abundance.
All right, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you. All right, then. So that is it from us. Amazing conversation here on matters education reforms. And my takeout is pumping money alone into educational reforms is not enough. Proper planning, partnerships, and collaborations are also key in the development of education systems. My name is Esther Diana in Uganda, Kampala, reporting for KT News.
Partnerships, collaboration, and of course, not throwing money at the problem. Good takeouts right there. And on that educative note, we want to proceed on a short commercial break, but on the other side of that break, more news, views, and of course, analysis of the week's big business stories here on KTN News. Do stay with us. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.